Hello again in anime realm, with a new anime called The Ossan Newbie Adventurer, trained to death by the most powerful party, became invincible. In a messed up wasteland, Rick gets launched across the damn floor in a fight, and he's seriously freaked out that he might bite the dust. Just then, his mentors come out of the smoke, and instead of giving him some damn first aid, they start praising him for getting so much better in the past 2 years of training. So he should have no problem with the E-rank adventure exams now. And the praise feels good, but homeboy still needs some damn medical attention. Normally, all the adventurers in this messed up world are young because it takes a toll on your body. But there are still some damn adults who never give up on their dreams. That's why Rick's still trying to take the entrance exam. He walks up to the desk and asks for his exam ticket. But while the receptionist is checking his info, she recognizes Rick and gets all hyped up, saying they used to know each other. At first Rick doesn't remember her, but then it clicks that he saw her last 2 years ago. They used to be co-workers, and she was totally shocked when Rick up and quit his job out of nowhere. And she was even more shocked when she heard he quit to become an adventurer. Rick feels a bit embarrassed because folks in their 30s like him ain't exactly the usual applicants for adventurers. Normally, you start at a low rank as a teen and work your way up in a year or two. The receptionist asks what Rick's been up to all this time since she ain't heard from him. So Rick explains that he was stuck up in the mountains the whole damn time, training with his mentors. Just then, the usual drunkard from the guild stumbles up to the desk, trying to flirt with the receptionist. But when she tries to turn him down because she's obviously working, the guy won't take no for an answer. So he starts getting a little rough with her. That's when Rick decides to step in. He pulls the guy aside and gives him a light tap in the gut, knocking him out cold. The receptionist apologizes for the trouble the drunk guy caused. But Rick says it's all good because he used to work as a receptionist too, and he don't get why the guild thinks it's smart to serve booze in there. After Rick gets his exam number, he heads outside and gets greeted by a maid named Rionette. She asks if he's done registering, and Rick confirms, thanking her for waiting on him. And while he says that, he's totally checking out Rionette's massive rack. She calls him out on it. So Rick tries to change the subject and talk about how pumped he is for the exam. Back inside the guild, the other adventurers are straight up flipping out at the handprint left on the drunk dude's armor. And that armor was made of some heavy-ass steel, so whoever did this gotta be seriously ripped. Right then, two dudes walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw a while back. His name's Donald, and he's a badass rank adventurer wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows it was Rick who laid the smackdown, but if he really took out an rank adventurer, he might be overqualified for this shit. Meanwhile, Rick's getting a physical exam, and they measure his height as 174 centimeters. The docs are surprised he's taking this test at 32 years old. After that, all the test takers are taken to the next room and told to put their hands on a crystal ball to measure their mana. The ball lights up based on how much mana a person's got. So the others touch it, and they get different results, with the highest being a C. But when it's Rick's turn, that damn ball barely lights up at all. So the examiner gives Rick an F on his mana test. The other candidates start clowning on Rick for having such weak-ass mana as he walks away. But as soon as the examiner calls for the next candidate, the ball straight up shatters. The next test is to measure their offensive skills. They gotta wail on a green rod as hard as they can. It's some special slime bag that can take a beating, so they don't gotta worry about breaking it. Rick remembers training on that slime bag once, and his mentor told him he had to be able to wreck a golden slime bag with just his fists. Rick thought that was impossible because a golden slime bag's as hard as a dragon's fang. But his mentor said it was the bare minimum if Rick wanted to be a true adventurer. And since his mentor could crush one with a single punch like it was nothing, Rick got motivated to train until it broke, even if he had to punch it 50,000 times a day. He hated that shit. But back to the present. The candidates are lining up to smash the bag with all their might, and after the first dude kicks it, they call up the second son of the Diamute family. Rumor has it his magic is as strong as a C-rank adventurer's, even though he's only 11 years old. As the kid steps up, he straight up unleashes a hellfire spell, and everyone including Rick is damn surprised about what just happened. But Rick's actually surprised because that spell was small as hell. The fireball shoots out and hits the target, and even the judges are impressed by the kid's power. And that's when Rick's even more shocked because the fireballs his magic teacher used to toss at him were way deadlier than what this kid just pulled off. Rick naturally assumes the kid's fireball must have been as strong as his teacher's, but maybe the kid scaled it down so it wouldn't wreck the whole damn building. As the power test continues, it eventually comes around to Rick's turn, but as he's walking up to the slime bag, the examiner stops him and asks if he's really over 30 years old. Rick answers yeah, so the examiner straight up tells him he's too damn old for this shit. Training doesn't usually amount to much unless you start real early in life, and with his weak-ass mana scores, he should just quit before he embarrasses himself. Rick knows people be judging him for being old, and he feels like throwing in the towel, but he's put in way too much work to get here, punching slime bags till his knuckles were bleeding, and he never stopped swinging. All that pain's gotta count for something. So even if he's at a disadvantage because of his age, he's gonna give it everything he's got. Rick winds up his punch, and when he connects with the bag, it straight up explodes and goes flying through the wall, leaving everyone, including Rick, dumbfounded because he wasn't expecting the bag to be such a pushover. The kid can't believe what he just saw, and he's pissed off by Rick's success because this was supposed to be his time to shine. But he's willing to lose to Rick for now because his specialty is straight up defensive magic. He's planning on outperforming Rick in the next test, but by the time they start the next test, the kid's left speechless because Rick just tanks a 4th nature spell like it's nothing. The examiner gives Rick props for blocking his attacks, and Rick appreciates it because he's doing his damn best. The instructor thinks Rick ain't giving it his all because he's been using only 1st order spells to defend himself. So he advises Rick to use higher level defensive magic from now on. But Rick tells him he doesn't know any other spells except 1st order ones, so he's really doing the best he can. The examiner can't believe Rick's limited to 1st order spells because his mana control is on point. But Rick assures him there won't be no problems, because from what he's seen so far, his 1st order spells should be more than enough to handle whatever the examiner throws at him. The examiner takes that shit personal, so he's ready to unleash a 5th order spell on Rick to teach him a lesson. He casts the spell and lets loose a shock cyclone that sends a massive shockwave rippling through the whole damn kingdom. It's so damn loud that even a knight on the other side of town can hear that shit. A few minutes later, Sylvester rolls up to the exam center to see what the hell's going on. They tell him some F-rank adventurer straight up wrecked a slime bag with their bare hands and blocked a 5th order spell like it was nothing, all while using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks they're playing some sick joke, but they are dead ass serious with what they just said. Right now, Rick's grinding through the written part of the exam, and he looks hella confident in his knowledge. Once the test is done, he takes a break with Rionette, and she asks how he did on the written shit. Rick says that without any doubt he will get 100% on that shit. After all, he spent 14 years as a damn receptionist at the guild, so there's no way he will fail. But he's still unsure if his overall score is gonna cut it to pass the exam. Rionette asks if Rick's worried about his practical exam scores, but he thinks he did pretty damn well in all the categories. The only problem is he got a big fat F on his mana exam, so he ain't sure how that gonna affect his chances. Rionette tells him not to trip because he trained his ass off for this exam. But before they can catch a breather, that kid from earlier storms up to Rick and starts screaming at him for doing too damn well on the tests. Rick's clueless about what the hell is going on, so he figures Freed must be lost or some shit, and offers to help him out. But Freed is pissed because this was supposed to be his day to show off his mad skills to all the peasants, and Rick went and outshined him, so now he's crying like an annoying baby. Rick tries to explain he ain't mean to steal his spotlight, but then Freed's sister shows up, and when she sees her little bro crying, she flips her shit and starts yelling at Rick. Rick asks if she's related to Freed or some shit, and she introduces herself as Angelica, the big sister. But Freed wastes no time telling her that this 40-year-old man ruined his day. Rick's offended and says he's only 30, but Angelica and Freed keep calling him a 40-year-old man. Eventually, Angelica throws her glove at Rick, challenging his ass to a duel. Rick, dumbass that he is, picks up the glove because he doesn't want to get it dirty or some shit. But little does he know picking up that glove is a declaration that he's ready to throw down. So Angelica happily sets up a spot for them to throw hands. She straight up says she gonna get a kick out of punishing Rick for making her bro cry. But if they gonna do this, they gotta stick to the rules. In the Philheim Kingdom, duels let the winner decide the penalty for the loser. So she sets a penalty stating that the loser gotta be the winner's servant for life. Angelica is supposedly some second-class royal knight, but Rick doesn't know how strong this second-class knight is supposed to be. So Rionette gives him the lowdown and explains that a second class knight would be like B rank. Rick starts freaking out because he knows B rank adventurers can take down giant monsters solo, but Rionette ain't sweating it and asks Rick to hold back so he don't accidentally snuff her. Rick can't even picture holding back against someone at B rank while he's stuck at F rank. He's still got no clue about his true strength. So Rionette tells him to trust all the training he's been putting in for the past couple of years. All of a sudden, all the messed up training memories come flooding back, and Rick ends up puking his guts out. Rick curses out Rionette for making him relive all that hell, but she reminds him that if he survived all that crap, he shouldn't have a problem dealing with Angelica. After all, he's been training with the strongest party on the whole damn continent, so he better start believing in himself a bit more. Rick realizes she's right, so he gets up ready to face Angelica fearlessly. He still ain't sure how his current strength gonna hold up against the second-class knight, but it's pointless to worry about that now. Angelica is cocksure she's way stronger than Rick. She promises to go easy on him so he don't end up 6 feet under. Then she starts powering up her attack. Then she uses Blink Step to zoom past Rick just to flex her speed. They even call her Light Speed Angelica, but Rick is surprised, and it ain't for the reason she thinks. Angelica says she gonna finish him off with her next attack, so she uses Blink Step again. But as she's closing in on Rick, he can't believe his eyes because Angelica moving like a sloth. The power scales must have been high on helium if they thought she deserved the Light Speed title, because she is moving slower than Rick's regular running pace. Rick easily dodges her strike, and Angelica can't wrap her head around it because it's supposed to be impossible for an F-rank adventurer to keep up with her speed. Only first-class knights ever manage to react to her quickness, so she tries to make sense of it by saying Rick got lucky, but she won't let it happen again. She pulls off another Blink Step, but to Rick, it's like she's moving in slow motion. He's starting to question how the hell she made it to B rank with such sluggish moves. He's realizing that maybe he's actually pretty damn strong. Just as he's about to dodge Angelica's attack, she trips on a damn rock and accidentally pulls off some vertical peel blade move. Rick can't predict any of her strikes, so he's struggling to dodge them. And by the time Angelica finally stops herself, he's losing faith in his own strength because he was caught off guard by that attack. But Angelica was caught off guard too because she didn't plan none of that. She tries acting all cool and tells Rick she's impressed that he dodged her last move because she totally meant to do it like that. But that just means she gotta step up her game and go even faster to overpower him. She busts out her special technique that lets her move 3 times faster than normal. But even with that speed boost, she's still slow as molasses to Rick. But he ain't attacking recklessly because he don't know what kind of tricks she got hidden. So he keeps dodging, and Angelica's mind is blown that Rick can still keep up with her. She can only use that technique 2 more times before she's out of juice, so she gives it her all and goes for one last desperate attack. But she trips again, so Rick tries to intercept her with a punch and ends up blowing a freaking hole in the ground. Angelica realizes she would have been toast if that punch landed, so she's terrified of Rick and wonders who the hell he really is. Rick just says he used to be a receptionist, but now he's an adventurer. He's pumped to keep fighting Angelica, so he climbs out of the hole to face her again. But Angelica straight up surrenders because she doesn't want to get killed. Rick don't get why she's giving up, but her surrender means he's the winner. And because of the penalty Angelica set, she gotta serve him for the rest of her life. Angelica completely forgot about that penalty, so she does the only thing that pops into her head and runs away. Rick don't really give a damn about the bet, so he ain't bothering to chase after her. And the exam results are about to come out, so he gotta go back and see if he passed. That's when Rionette drops the bomb that the rest of his mentors are coming to check on him, and Rick's freaking out because their arrival always spells trouble. The next morning, he rolls into the main exam hall where all the participants are sitting their asses down. This attendant girl comes up and tells them they better have their admit cards on deck because the judge is gonna send some mana their way. They go one by one, and if the card glows red, that means they straight up failed and gotta give it another shot next year. But if that shit turns blue, it means they passed that damn exam. Rick's shaking in his boots, not knowing what the hell's gonna go down. He looks over at Rionette hoping she can give him some reassurance. She keeps it cool and tells him not to trip and to have faith in himself. He's been training his ass too damn hard for the past 2 years, and she personally thinks he's got what it takes to pass. That eases Rick's mind a bit, and he starts thinking about how pretty Rionette looks. but at the same time realizes that he must be much older than she is. Rionette turns to him and says he ain't gotta worry. Even if he fails, he can always give it another shot next year, but they're gonna have to crank up his training intensity by 3 freaking times. That shit shocks him because he barely survived their regular training. But before he can say anything, his card starts glowing, flashing red and blue like crazy, building up that suspense. Finally, it reveals the color to be blue, meaning he freaking passed the exam. He bounces out of the hall with a big ass smile on his face, rolling alongside Rionette. Then out of nowhere, he catches a whiff of this strong ass scent and covers his nose. That stench is coming from some flashy dude who strolls up to Rionette and grabs her arm. He introduces himself as Raster, the Duke of the Northern Kingdom. Raster doesn't even give a damn about Rick and starts spitting game at Rionette, telling her she's so damn beautiful he wants her as his second wife. Thank God, Rick steps in once again, pissing Raster off. This dude gives him a dark ass look and asks what the hell an ugly old man wants. Rick tells him straight up that Rionette is his girl, and he can't let nobody hit on her. But Raster starts laughing and acts like he can't believe a middle-aged dude like Rick scored a babe like her. He peeps the adventurer exam card in Rick's hand and starts smirking, saying he can't believe someone at Rick's age is only an F-rank adventurer. But Rick fires back, saying Raster doesn't seem too strong himself. Raster straight up disses Rick, calling him a straight-up scrub for not recognizing his greatness. He brags about becoming an E-rank adventurer at the ripe age of 14 and now being an A-rank adventurer, as well as the examiner for the second stage of the damn exam. He turns to Rionette and straight up asks her to go on a dinner date with him. But Rionette clings to Rick's arm like her life depends on it and tells Raster to bounce because his cologne is too damn overpowering for her taste. Pissed off, Raster turns around and swears on his mama's grave that he gonna put Rick in his place when the time comes. The next morning, Rick shows up at the exam center and finds out that the second stage gonna be mock battles. That shit scares the hell out of him. Rionette tells him to hold back, but Rick says he gotta go all out against these strong-ass participants, especially if Raster gonna be his examiner. Suddenly, this dude calls out to Rick and says he gonna be his examiner for the day. That kinda eases his nerves a bit, and the guy tells Rick it's hella inspiring to see a guy his age still trying to become an adventurer. The examiner introduces himself as Lynx and says even he decided to become an adventurer when he was 25, which is pretty late in the game, so he has been hustling ever since. He tells Rick his goal is to become an A-rank adventurer. But damn, it took him 20 fricking years just to hit B rank, so he ain't even sure if a rank is possible for him. Rick gives him a pep talk, they shake hands, and before the examiner bounces, he wishes Rick good luck. After that, Rick's feeling pretty good while chilling in the waiting room. Suddenly, this person walks in, opens the door, and says Lynx the examiner got suddenly sick, so Raster gonna take his place for now. At first, Rick doesn't even think twice because he forgot the name, but Rionette reminds him, and he starts freaking out. She tells him Raster is the Duke of the Northern Kingdom, which means he gotta be connected to Knight Angelica, and that boy freed in some way. And that's some next level bad news because Rick done humiliated both of them before. The other participants start getting worried too, and they tell him Raster is one ruthless examiner who gets off on torturing the participants who catch his eye. Dude's got the nickname the F-ranked Crusher because he loves crushing dreams and souls. And Rick realizes now that he did catch more than just Raster's attention. Later we see Raster in the examining arena, straight up obliterating a participant with his damn spells, calling him a low-ranking peasant, and calls the next unlucky soul forward. Rick is shaking in his boots at this point, pacing around like a madman because he knows Raster gonna straight up murder him. All he wanna do is run his ass back home, but if he does that, his senior's gonna triple his training, and that's a one-way ticket to his death. So he's stuck in a real tight spot. Rionette sits her ass down on the floor and tells Rick that if he can lose so much confidence just because of some people talking, then he gotta be able to gain confidence when she shows him the truth. She tells him he done put in enough work and training to breeze through this damn exam, no matter who he goes up against. At this point, he has nothing to lose and everything to gain. That shit really puts things into perspective for Rick, and he thanks Rionette for helping him calm the hell down. Suddenly, this small dude with a hood comes over and asks if Rick wanna know his future. Rick, being the dumbass he is, ends up accepting the offer, especially when the guy says it's gonna be free. He plops a crystal ball on the table and tells Rick to take a seat, but all of a sudden, Rionette peeps that there's a spell on the chair. Unfortunately, Rick straight up disappears before she can even do something, and that pisses her the hell off. She unleashes an aerial slash, tearing through the crystal ball and the wall behind the dude, who turns out to be Freed. She realizes it was teleportation magic and demands Freed to spill about where he sent Rick. And when he refuses, she straight up uses her finger to slash off his damn eyelashes, threatening that next time she gonna go for his eyes. That shit shakes Freed up, and he spills that teleportation is hella complex. Even a genius like him can only teleport someone about 100 meters away, so Rick gotta be nearby. Turns out Rick got teleported behind the exam center near the river, but before he can even figure out what the hell going on, a crew of all black dressed peeps surround his ass completely. The old butler steps forward and tells Rick they need him to disappear for a bit. They introduce themselves as the elite guards of the Northern Kingdom. So Rick immediately knows it's a damn plan by Raster. The butler says that all the guards are on the same level as B and A rankers, so Rick doesn't stand a chance against them. But then out of nowhere, his seniors show up on a damn cliff, asking what the hell he doing here. Rick gets scared shitless as they drop down from the cliff, so he straight up tells the butler to bounce because their lives are in danger. But one of the bald idiots goes and attacks the orc, and that beast doesn't even flinch because the blade just snaps when it touches his skin. Now the bald idiot tries to throw a punch, but the orc just grabs his fist and crushes it like a tomato. The other seniors ain't even fazed by this shit, while the bald dude got no damn clue what to do. To his surprise, the orc casts a healing spell and heals his arm, telling him to practice some more. Then the blonde gangster tells Rick not to worry because he gonna handle it like the Texans do. And then he whips out a freaking machine gun from God knows where. The guards start attacking him, but you should never bring a knife to a gunfight because he just uses magical bullets to blast them all down. And Rick watching all this horror going on. Suddenly, one of the guards snatches up this little demon girl named Alice and holds her at knife point, telling the seniors to drop their weapons. Rick's horrified and tells them to let the girl go for their own damn sake. But Alice just thinking these fools playing some game. So the dude ends up smacking her on the head, and that shit pisses her off real bad. So she straight up blasts them all away in an instant. The butler slowly starts realizing who these people are because he recognizes them. Alice is some prodigy, the world's strongest vampire mage, and she is only 10 freaking years old. Mizet is half dwarf, half elf, and he is so damn skilled he can make future tech. And Ash, he an orc who masters all kinds of support magic and has mad strength and wisdom. The butler claims these peeps belong to the strongest damn party in the whole world, with only S-rank members up in there, known as the Fist. So Alice goes on dealing with all the guards, blasting them left and right, while Rick hauls ass back to the exam hall to meet up with Rionette, who straight up slams Freed into a wall soon as she lays eyes on Rick. But before they can even talk, the damn door swings open and Link stumbles in looking all beat up. He says Raster forced him to step down as the examiner and locked his ass in the room. He tells Rick to get the hell out of the exam hall for his own safety. But Rick is all pissed off and tells Lynx to chill the hell out. And then we see angry ass Rick marching into the arena, while Raster conjuring up a massive column of fire, ready to put an end to Rick's adventure right here. Before Rick can even step foot in the arena, Raster is out there having a blast bullying some poor dude who's straight up shaking in his boots. He throws a fireball at the poor guy, roasting him in a hot minute. Now, there's this adventurer watching from the stands, and he says that this performance is exactly what he expected from an E-rank promotion exam. This dude suddenly breaks it and introduces himself as Adolf, a popular adventurer. He starts telling the crowd about the 4 cores of power: physical strength, body control, magic reserves, and magic control. These cores determine how strong and skilled an adventurer is, and Adolf was born with this dope ability that lets him visualize the 4 cores of power for anyone. He uses his ability on the next contestant and finds out the dude's slightly better in physical strength and body control, but he's still weak. Raster takes him out with just one attack, and Adolf knew this would happen. Then he uses his ability on Raster, and his magic reserves are off the charts, and his magic control is on point too. Adolf exclaims that he is indeed an A-ranked hunter. But then suddenly, his eyes start hurting because looking at powerful folks for too long ain't good for his health. So he shifts his focus to the weakling getting carried away on a stretcher. Suddenly, he spots Rick standing in the corner, and at first glance, Adolf thinks this dude looks hella boring. He's low-key entertained by the idea that someone his age is trying to pass this exam. and he's also curious about Rick's stats, so he uses his ability on Rick, and damn, the triangle of Rick's physical strength, body control, and magic control starts growing way beyond the range of the chart. In just 1 second of watching him, Adolf's rolling on the ground feeling like his eyes are straight up burning. On the flip side, Alyssa comes up to Rionette and says she saw her with Rick yesterday. She introduces herself as Rick's former co-worker from when he was working at the guild, and Rionette introduces herself as a fellow party member of Rick. They are getting along just fine when suddenly Alice calls Rionette, asking if she can watch the next match with them. So Rionette invites Alyssa to see Rick's performance with the rest of the crew, and she's all down for it. But as she gets closer and sees the kinda weird-ass crew, she gets scared as hell when she sees an orc in there. Then that pervert Misette tries to get Rionette to sit next to him, but she straight up refuses because she knows he's gonna harass her. Dude immediately switches his attention to Alyssa instead, and Rionette introduces her as Rick's ex-coworker. Right then, Rick walks into the arena, and the wise orc Ash asks Rionette how their old rookie doing. Rionette is confident as hell that Rick gonna ace the test without breaking a sweat, but Alyssa mentions that Raster is known to be a devilishly tough examiner. She tells Ash that Raster isn't a rank adventurer, and he uses overpowering force to subdue the low-ranked adventurers. Ash ain't worried about it and turns his focus back to the upcoming fight. In the arena, Raster all surprised to see that Rick somehow survived the attack from his elite guards. He starts talking about them being incompetent commoners, but a genius noble like him ain't gonna give his opponent no chance to escape. Rick can feel the terrifying aura coming off Raster, matching his magic reserves, and the examiner can see that Rick barely has any magic left. Out of nowhere, Rick asks Raster about the reason he became an adventurer. Raster says he did it because he got a talent for it, and it gonna look good on his noble resume too. But Raster then says that he is already bored with it and gonna quit this job real soon. Those words piss off Rick, who declares he ain't ever gonna lose to a punk like him. Raster laughs, saying Rick gonna learn his place real soon. He decides to start the test with an ice shot magic spell that zooms right past Rick's ear and smashes into the wall. Rick doesn't even flinch to dodge it, and Raster asks if he is so scared he can't even move. Rick doesn't even respond to his taunts because right before the match, Rionette told him to stay cool and watch his opponent's moves for the first minute. It took all his patience, but Rick decides to believe in Rionette's advice. Seeing that Raster ain't throwing down, Raster decides to take charge and blasts a class 3 fire magic at him without chanting. Rick straight up takes that magic head on, and Alyssa starts stressing about his safety. But damn, Rick comes out of the flames unscathed, and Ash tells the receptionist that a puny-ass attack like that ain't gonna harm their old rookie at all. Ash asks if she knows about the 4 power cores, and Alyssa says that she knows about them. Ash goes on to say that out of the 4 cores, magic reserves gotta be trained from a young age because as you get older, it gets tougher to increase them. Ain't many folks who can boost their mana capacity after hitting 20. But Rick started adventuring at 30. Ash explains that's why Rick's got a measly amount of mana. So when he was training him, the first thing he said was to always rely on his body. Ash gave Rick his first mission, which was to hit up a nearby village. But he had to do it with a 100-kilo ankle weight. Rick was freaking out already. But then Ash told him to quickly follow him because the forest they were training in was full of dangerous monsters. Rick booked it as fast as he could with the weights dragging him down. And that's how his first training sesh ended with Ash. Back to the present, Raster busts out a class 4 wind spell on Rick, but he toughs that shit out too. Ash proudly declares that he built Rick's strength from the ground up. Misette was in charge of teaching him magic control, and Rionette helped him boost his body control. Ash goes on to say that Rick faced their grueling training with mad effort, and that's why he already got skills on par with S-rank hunters. Alyssa's straight up shocked by these words, but the proof's right in front of her as Rick endures another class 4 magic spell from Raster. Rionette tells the receptionist that Rick ain't even aware of his true strength, because Ash kept downplaying his achievements, and saying even F-rank adventurers could do that shit. Meanwhile, in the arena, Raster unleashes a deadly combo of different elemental magic spells on Rick. All while calling him a third-rate, he smashes him under 2 massive boulders, thinking he might have gone too far. But damn, Rick comes out of that mess unscathed. Raster's pissed now, so he decides to end this with his fists. He charges his fists with a powerful attack spell, and then rushes ahead at Rick with a flash step that his little sister has mastered. But Rick counters Raster's punch with his own, and sends him flying back to where he started. Raster ain't got a clue what just went down, but Rick's starting to piece it together. He thinks Raster was born with mad talents, and his magic game is something to flex, but he's lacking in other areas, and Rick thinks it's because he skipped training because of his big ego. so he's damn sure now he won't lose to Raster in any case. On the flip side, Raster decides to unleash his true power and throws a class 3 fire spell at Rick after chanting the whole thing. But damn, Rick blows that spell away with his bare hands, saying he doesn't even need a spell to block weak-ass moves like that. Raster tells him not to get too cocky because his luck saved him once. He tries to zoom ahead at full speed, but he's too slow for Rick, who catches up in a damn flash. Raster tries turning his body into steel to block Rick's punch. Even with a heavy-duty defense spell, Raster feels some pain from that hit. He admits Rick's abilities go way beyond E rank, but he's still damn sure luck played a role in keeping him standing here. Rick asks if he's too scared to admit his own skills, and Raster asks how the hell someone with just a tiny bit of magic juice can get so strong in 2 years. That question brings up some messed up memories of when he was locked in a dragon's cage until he could kill it, had to sprint through an explosive field, and even swam in a paralytic poison lake till he drowned. Meanwhile, Ash is spilling all this to Alyssa at the same time, and she's losing her mind, saying anyone would bite the dust from that shit. Ash says Rick did indeed die, but he brought his ass back to life with his healing magic right after he kicked the bucket. That's how Rick became stronger than anyone else, by breaking through his damn limits. Mizette agrees that Rick's a damn hard worker, as he remembers the time he kicked him off a cliff, telling him to feel the wind on his skin to up his magic control. And Alice chucked a massive boulder at him during a spar. He died both times, but Ash revived him. But somehow, he managed to survive Rionette's brutal training. Rick wraps it all up by spilling these stories to Raster, who just laughs and tells him to ditch the adventuring job and start writing fantasy tales instead. He asks Rick what kept him going through all that hellish training, and Rick proudly declares that his dream of taking down the ultimate beast known as Kaiser Alcipiad pushed him through it all. Raster laughs at him, saying that the monster called Kaiser and the book about the hero Yamato who fought him is just some fairy tale. Rick says he doesn't give a damn about what anyone else thinks because beating Kaiser is still his dream. Raster's had enough now, so he decides to end the battle with his next move. He ties Rick with some strong-ass vines and starts chanting the spell for a class 8 magic, which is as high as humans can go. Rick recognizes the spell Raster's chanting, but it's too late because thick branches start sprouting behind him, forming a massive golem. Raster hops inside the golem, ready to finish Rick once and for all. In response, Rick gets ready to blast him with a class 1 wind magic shot. Raster laughs and says that weak-ass magic ain't gonna save him. Rick asks him how many damn times he's practiced his spell, because he's practiced that air shot 100 million times. Ain't nobody believing that crazy-ass number, but Ash confirms it's true, and they used some special time-space magic to make it happen. Raster don't give a damn, and he unleashes his golem's magic fist on Rick. Rick manages to break free from the restraints and counters the golem's punch with his wind shot. Their attacks seem equal in strength, but suddenly the wooden golem starts splitting apart. Rick's air shot overpowers the class 8 magic and shatters the whole damn golem, sending Raster flying off. The dude crash lands in the stands, leaving everyone in the crowd shocked. Later, Rick goes to meet up with his crew, who congratulate him on his win. Alice is there too, and she tells Rick he was hella cool earlier. Just then, Raster shows up, limping and struggling from the beatdown he took before. Rick calls out to him and says the reason he won against a genius like him is because he practiced way harder. He says even though he can only use one attack, he practiced that shit way longer than anyone else and mastered it fully. Rick advises Raster to start training on one spell at a time, and the frustrated examiner just walks right past him. He tells Rick that on their next promotion exam, they gonna meet again, and that time he gonna definitely beat him. The dude limps away with his 2 siblings following, but Angelica bows to Rick, and that shit confuses him. Later that night, they announce the results for the E-rank promotion exams, and Rick waits patiently for his number to be called with Rionette by his side, while his crew is already off celebrating. Then, as the names get called out one by one, Rick seems hella chill. Rionette asks him how he went from being a nervous wreck during the test to suddenly being all calm. He tells her he just remembered something important and starts reminiscing about a story he read back in his childhood. The story was about this adventurer named Yamato, and it mentioned the name of the sickest monster in the whole damn world, Kaiser. They said whoever beats that ultimate monster can get a treasure that grants all their wishes. That story got Rick all pumped up, and he went and told his parents about his dream of becoming an adventurer. But his parents weren't down with that shit. Just like everyone's parents, his dad says that this book and its stories are fairy tales. There is no ultimate monster or treasure or shit. and his mom was all worried about him risking his life and didn't want him in danger. So they straight up told Rick to find a real stable job, and that crushed his spirit. But then, one day a doctor tells Rick that he has some unique trait inside him, but they ain't sure when it's gonna kick in. That idea of having this special trait made Rick even more determined to become an adventurer. He figured that when his trait finally activates and he gets his inherent skill, he's gonna prove his parents wrong. So the next day, Rick starts bragging to his school friends about his skill, even though it ain't activated yet, and they start asking him if it's kicked in yet. Rick tells them to chill and have patience because good things take time. But as the days turn into weeks, then months, and his skill is still dormant, he starts losing hope. Years go by, and Rick enters his teenage years, but his skill still ain't showing up. That shit got him stuck in a constant state of depression. His friends try to console him by saying that sometimes even if you got the trait, the skill never activates, but that doesn't help his depression one bit. So they suggest he should still try becoming an adventurer even without the skill, because they say adventurers can still make a lot of money. But for Rick, it ain't about the money, bro. It's about something deeper. The time kept passing by, and Rick landed himself a job as a guild receptionist. And let me tell you, his old school parents were ecstatic about it. So he starts his life as a bland office worker, dealing with a mountain of paperwork every damn day and helping out all sorts of adventurers. And in the midst of all that, he keeps trying to unlock his inherent skill. But it's like he's hitting a solid brick wall. He's drifting further and further away from his dream and losing all his passion for life. But then, a glimmer of hope appears when hot Alyssa joins the guild as his junior. But while Rick's still flying solo without a girlfriend, all his buddies start popping out kids left and right. Then one day, he finally closes his favorite book, the one that fueled his dream of becoming the elite adventurer, and he shelves it, never to crack it open again. One day, he helps out the newbie Alyssa with her work, dropping some knowledge as her senior. He also tells her to get ready for posting emergency quests because the monster hunting season is around the corner. Just as she bounces, Rick's adventurer homie Zaid shows up, all hyped up and shit. He's flashing his B rank medal, bragging about finally getting promoted, and Rick, hiding his envy like a boss, gives him props and congrats him. Later that night, Rick gets wasted and starts comparing himself to Zaid, who started his adventure when Rick started his receptionist job. For the past decade, Rick's been stuck in his job, doing the same repetitive shit day in and day out, while other people out there living the life he always wanted. Rick lays his ass down on the cool grass, gazing up at the sky, thinking that even though he ain't get what he wanted, at least he got a stable job and no major gripes about life. But then his mind starts wandering, wondering what would have happened if he became an adventurer. But he decides it's pointless to dwell on that. Right at that moment, Rick hears some people screaming about a monster attack, and he jumps to his feet and rushes to help them because he thinks he knows what's going down. So my man Rick heads straight into the danger zone, thinking he's about to face some weak-ass low-rank monster. But he gets the shock of his life when he comes face to face with a freaking giant troll, a mid-rank monster. Panic starts creeping up on him when suddenly this white-haired maid struts by, fresh from her grocery run. Rick jumps in front of her, trying to be all heroic and protect her from the monster. But this badass maid ain't having it. She tells him to step aside, and she goes and slices that giant troll into a million pieces like it's nothing. Then she tells the shocked Rick that she appreciates the thought of saving her, but she's an adventurer and doesn't need any help. And that's when Rick meets Rionette for the very first time. So he walks her home, showing his gratitude for saving his sorry ass. They introduce themselves, and Rick can't help but ask Rionette if she's a B-rank adventurer because she's mad strong. But Rionette goes and whips out her S-rank medal, leaving Rick dumbfounded, as rank adventurers are on a whole another level. They're so elite that their names are taken off the guild registry, and they deal with the main office directly. After Rick recovers from his shock, he musters up the courage to ask Rionette a question, begging her not to laugh. Rionette tells him she ain't laughed since she was 8 and tells him to spill it. Nervously, Rick spills his guts about his dream to defeat Kaiser and his dormant trait skill. He asks Rionette if a dude like him, in his 30s, can become an adventurer. Rionette tells him that when he tried to save her earlier, he showed he's got the courage to be an adventurer. But since he's in his 30s, his magic reserves ain't gonna improve anymore. And because of that, Rionette straight up tells Rick he ain't gonna make it as an adventurer. And that crushed him. His last connection to his childhood dream shattered right there. But he acts all relieved, like he's glad to finally give up his dream after getting some expert opinion. He tries to change the subject by cracking a joke, saying they should grab dinner together sometime. But Rionette surprises him by actually agreeing. She even suggests they go tomorrow. That puts Rick in one hell of a good mood the next day, and at night, he's bouncing with joy as he heads to Rionette's place. But damn it, a bunch of peeps come running from that direction, yelling about a monster attack, and Rick's heart sinks. He rushes rushes to the scene only to find out that Rionette already took care of business. Right at that moment, a bunch more monsters start creeping out of the forest. Rionette tells Rick to find some damn shelter because he ain't gonna be no help out here. Then she pulls out these needle-sized blades from her thigh straps, and with just those tiny things, she starts slicing and dicing those giant monsters like it's a freaking breeze. Rick's jaw drops, and he can't believe what he's seeing, but before he can process it all, Rionette's hit with a surge of mana that brings back all her PTSD from when her whole village got wiped out by a monster. She's screaming and suffering in pain, so Rick rushes over to support her, and out of nowhere, this massive ape monster shows up, ready to pounce on Rick and Rionette, but Zaid swoops in just in time and saves their asses. Zaid asks Rick why the hell he chose this monster-infested spot for his date. Then he tells Rick to step back while he handles things. 2 more adventurers show up to back him up, and together, they unleash their powers and freeze those monsters using ice magic. Then Zaid enchants his axe with wind magic and slices through them like butter. While Rick's feeling all jelly watching these adventurers in action, Rionette tells him they got danger coming their way and they gotta evacuate. She straight up tells him that the B-rank adventurers around here ain't got what it takes to fight the monster that's coming. Rick asked her what the hell she is talking about, and she tells him that a freaking dragon is heading their way. Rick can't believe it, even though she explains that whenever she senses a dragon's mana, her trauma takes over and messes with her control over her own mana. And then a massive dragon appears in the freaking sky, and everyone's shaking in their boots. Zaid lays down the unwritten rule of the Adventurer Guild: if you face a dragon when you are below a rank, you haul ass and run for your life. But his magician buddy gets all scared shitless and does the dumb thing of attacking the dragon. That just pisses off the dragon, and it lets out a roar so loud that the shockwave knocks everyone flat on their asses. Zaid tells them all to book it, but they ain't fast enough because the dragon throws up a barrier to trap them. Zaid swings his axe at the barrier, but it's like hitting a brick wall and nothing happens. The freaking dragon starts getting closer, and Zaid straight up accepts that this is gonna be the end for them. But out of nowhere, Rick starts walking toward the dragon. He says he might have lived his whole life as a damn receptionist, but if he's gotta face this dragon, he's gonna die like a true adventurer. Honestly, the dude's scared as hell, but deep down he feels a tiny flame burning inside him, pushing him forward. In that moment, Rick feels like this is the life he always wanted for himself. He grabs a damn rock and tosses it at the dragon. Now it doesn't do shit to the dragon, but it gets Zaid and the other 2 adventurers fired up. They start attacking the dragon too, but their hits ain't doing any shit against this beast. The dragon breathes fire at them, and even though Zaid tries using his iron body defense skill, everyone gets knocked the hell out. Rionette's cursing herself for being useless in the fight. When out of the rubble, Rick rises up and walks toward the dragon. Talking about his dreams, the dragon straight up crushes him under its paw, but instead of killing Rick, that shit actually unlocks his hidden skill. Rick hears the freaking universe speak to him, telling him he's obtained a skill, and then he rises up like nothing, lifting the dragon's heavy-ass paw with just one hand. Rionette sees the mana overflowing from Rick's body, and she's just as confused as the rest of them. But Rick's feeling all confident. He challenges the dragon, saying it's gonna be the damn practice dummy for his newly awakened skill. The dragon breathes fire at him, but Rick easily blocks it with a barrier. Then the dragon ramps up its flames, but that shit doesn't even scratch Rick's barrier, and then he straight up punches his mana at the dragon with so much power that he leaves a freaking hole where its head used to be. The dragon crashes to the ground, and everyone's in shock watching Rick stand there like a freaking hero. But damn right after all that, Rick passes out from all the stress. When he finally wakes up after a whole damn week, he's in a world of hurt. Luckily, Rionette's right there by his side, filling him in on what went down. She tells him he was knocked out cold for a whole week, and she stuck around the whole time waiting for him because she wanted to recruit him for her crew called the Fist. She lays it all out for him, saying this ultimate monster named Kaiser is real, and their party's one goal is to defeat that beast one day, because Rick's got that never give up attitude and ain't afraid to step up to danger. Rionette believes he's got what it takes to get stronger and fight alongside them. She tells him he can still become a full-on adventurer, and Rick's blown away by her words because nobody's ever said that shit to him before. The tears start flowing as he realizes he can finally chase after his dream, and just as his flashback ends, they call out his name on the loudspeaker, announcing that he passed the exam. As they head back, Rionette throws some props his way, but Rick can't take his eyes off that E-rank adventurer medal in his hand because now he's achieved the first part of his childhood dream. He's officially become an adventurer. The scene then shifts to Link's trekking deep into the mountains. He's kinda shocked, thinking Rick actually lives around here. Flashback to after the exam, Rick told Lynx about his place. and Lynx says that they should have the drink that they promised to celebrate this. Rick happily agreed, but wondered where they should have it. Lynx suggested going to Rick's place because he is curious about his team, but Rick made this awful face and told Lynx to bring his best game gear if he wanted to visit. Back in the present, Lynx is scratching his head, wondering why Rick threw him off like this. And the map Rick gave him leads straight to the Demon Lord's castle. Lynx starts doubting if Rick messed up the directions and heads to the castle, feeling a bit iffy. He rings the doorbell, and Rick opens up, apologizing for dragging him all this way. As they walk, Lynx is surprised that there are no monsters lurking around, and Rick explains that the monsters stay clear of this place. So Lynx is puzzled about why he needs this gear then. Rick says it's to ensure he makes it back home safe, which makes Lynx a bit uneasy. They step into the castle, and Rionette greets them. Alice shows up next, all lively and cheerful. Lynx hopes her daughter can grow up with that same energy. But Alice then casually throws out some level 6 magic, and Rick jumps in to shield Lynx from it. Rick scolds Alice for using magic indoors, and she blames him for not hanging out with her. Lynx is taken aback by the scene, and Rionette tells Alice she'll be deducting the cost of the damage from her meal. And Alice quickly apologizes and pleads not to cut down her food. Rick tells Lynx he'll be sticking with Alice for a bit so she doesn't pull another stunt. Rionette then leads Lynx to the guest room. Lynx thinks the castle is huge and notices Mizette hanging around outside. He heads over and wonders what Mizette's holding in his hand. Mizette spots him and recognizes him as Rick's buddy. He mentions that this RPG thing is his hobby, and making stuff like this is his jam. Then we see Lynx tries to fire the RPG, following Mizette's instructions. Mizette tells him to focus his mana in it and pull the trigger. When Lynx pulls the trigger, the recoil sends him flying backward. He's stunned by the destruction the weapon causes. Mizette thinks it's a solid model but needs less recoil. Lynx comments that if this thing gets mass-produced, it could change the whole game of war. Next, we see Lynx wandering through the castle's hallways, thinking everyone here is pretty strange. Then he spots Ash buried in books in his study. Ash notices Lynx peeking and invites him in, and Lynx is blown away by the sheer number of books. Ash says this is his room, and being surrounded by books helps him chill out. Lynx thinks of Ash as a real brainiac and wonders if he's part of Rick's crew. He then asks if Ash has read all the books, and Ash says he's read most but hasn't caught up with the latest ones because he's been busy training Rick. Lynx is surprised Ash is handling Rick's training. Ash asks if Lynx is interested, and Lynx says he is, asking Ash to train him too. Ash likes the sparkle in Lynx's eyes, it reminds him of Rick, so agrees to take him on. Later, Rick finds out Ash took Lynx to the woods and starts worrying about his soon-to-be dead friend. We then see Lynx falling off a cliff with weights tied to his legs, thinking he's done for. But he lands on a monster, saving himself. He notices Rionette is carrying the dead monster and realizes it's supposed to be their dinner. He thanks her for saving his life. Then she sees the weights and figures out Ash's behind this. Lynx explains Ash told him to run down the cliff like it's a slope and then pushed him. He says he would have died if not for Rionette, and Rionette agrees, mentioning Ash is responsible for most of Rick's deaths. Lynx pretends he didn't hear that. Then Ash comes back and asks if they should continue training, and he drags Lynx away. In the evening, Lynx is totally wiped out, and Rick says he warned him about this. Lynx mentions that Ash promised to go easy on him, but Rick tells him not to trust those words. He's been duped by them plenty of times himself. Ash chimes in, saying he's just exaggerating, and that even if things got really bad, he could just revive Lynx without a hitch. So Rick questions if Ash doesn't value a person's life at all. Alice then asks Rick if she can play with this old dude, but Rick refuses, knowing she'll turn him into dust. Mizette points out it's Rick's fault for bringing his friend here, as he should have known that things would turn out like this, and Rick agrees with him. Later, Rionette serves tea to Rick and Lynx and heads off to prepare dinner. Lynx comments on how amazing Rionette is and wonders how far Rick's gotten with her. Rick says they're not like that, insisting she's not interested in him because he's just an old guy in his 30s. Lynx tells him there's nothing wrong with that, revealing his own wife is 20 years younger than him. Rick's surprised by this, and Lynx says it's all about timing and mutual feelings. Hearing this, Rick feels encouraged. The scene shifts to dinner, and Lynx praise Rionette's cooking, and Ash and the others ask for seconds. Rionette goes to get more food, and Lynx suggests Rick should help her out. He says showing consideration for her might close the gap between them, so Rick heads after her. Lynx then asks the others about Rick's inherent skill and wants to see it. He finds out Rick's skill only activates in specific situations and can't be used at will. But Lynx is still jealous that Rick has any skill at all. and Ash tells him that even without his skill, Rick is still an S ranker. But if he activates his Reckless Soul skill, he can surpass even them. After dinner, Ash asks Lynx if he knows about the 6 grand orbs. Lynx vaguely remembers reading about them in the Legend of Yamato and thinks they sound like fairy tale stuff, but realizes they must be real if Ash is talking about them. Rick then fills him in that their mission is to take down Kaiser Alcipiat, and the 6 grand orbs are the key to unlocking the dungeon called Source Spiral, where Kaiser Alcipiat is resting. Mizette adds that the 6 grand orbs activate every 200 years, and we're in that cycle right now. They should be giving off strong mana, and Rick wonders if Lynx has heard anything about this. Lynx doesn't recall hearing anything like that, but says he'll check with the secret intelligence on non-public quests. Ash thanks him for that, and then Rick asks if Lynx has any advice for him on how to deal with Rionette, since he couldn't help her in the kitchen since she's perfect at everything. The scene shifts to an F-ranked adventurer named Rise Lucas cleaning the guild. She's not thrilled with her job because she signed up to fight monsters, not clean. She sees Ash, Alice, and Rick trying to take a quest, but the guild master tells them they can't take it. Ash is confused about why they can't take a difficulty 82 quest. Then Rise wonders why the guild master is bowing to them. And Rick then spots that the quest is for a party of 4 and suggests they could take it if they get a temporary member. So Ash asks the guild master for help finding a temporary member, and the guild master pushes Rise into the role, saying it's a great chance for her to take on a dangerous mission since she always asking for one. But he doesn't even wait for her response and practically drags her along. Rise wonders if she's supposed to go with a talking orc, and the guild master tells her to show respect since they're superior adventurers. Rise thinks the orc must be the special one, and the other 2 are just an old man and a kid, so she puts on a high and mighty attitude, saying she'll help them. Later, they head over to the quest location. On the way, Rise asks if they're on a treasure hunt or something, and Rick explains they're after some magic crystals. Apparently, someone they know tipped them off that one of these crystals is somewhere around here. Rise is curious if the crystal's gonna be worth a lot. Rick says yeah, but warns it's risky since these crystals can attract monsters. Rise just laughs it off, saying she's got no worries. She claims she can handle any monster, and even though she's an F ranker now, she'll hit a rank in no time. She asks Rick what rank he is, and he says he just got bumped to E rank recently. Rise thinks to herself that he's just a late bloomer and hopes she doesn't end up like him. Then they spot the glow from the grand orb. Back at the castle, Rionette is cleaning windows, hoping Rick and the crew are doing okay. Mizette is also at the castle, working on some gadget he made, and he then stealthily sends a pipe under Rionette's skirt. He uses the pipe to blow air up her skirt, trying to sneak a peek at her panties. Just as he's about to get a view, Rionette catches him in the act. She asks what the gadget is for, and Mizette says it's just a device to make wind without using mana. Rionette thinks it's interesting, but then slices it into pieces, putting an end to Mizette's sneaky attempt. The scene shifts back to Rick and the team running into a wyvern on their path. Ash figures the crystal might be in the wyvern's nest. Rise freaks out, hiding because one wyvern is already bad news, and the nest nearby could mean it might summon more of them. Ash coolly walks up to the wyvern, and Rise wonders if he's got a plan. Dwayne Johnson takes out the wyvern with one punch and says that was his plan. Rise is stunned and warns him the wyvern's gonna call for backup. Ash explains that's why he left it alive, which blows Rise's mind. Ash starts getting annoyed with Rise and asks Rick to take her away. Rick guides her out of the forest, and Rise asks why they didn't mention they'd be dealing with wyverns. Rick reminds her that she bragged about being strong, but Rise says that's her goal for the future. Just then, a wyvern corpse comes flying at them, leaving Rise totally shocked. Inside the forest, Ash and Alice are wrecking wyverns like they're just training dummies. Rise is in total shock, seeing how these wyverns are getting tossed around. Then a red wyvern shows up, but Rick saves Rise, and Rise explains that red wyverns are supposed to be as tough as dragons. Rick swoops in to save Rise from the red wyvern. Rise is freaking out, warning him that an E-ranker like him doesn't stand a chance against a dragon. Rick just tells her to get out of there, but seeing his determination, she decides to stick around and fight. She says she doesn't want to ditch her friends like Yamato would never do, and Rick's got to respect that. Rick nods and tells her to back him up while he fights. But before she can even get into position, Rick nails the wyvern with a single punch, taking it down in one hit. He realizes just how powerful he really is, while Rise is left wondering why he even bothered asking for support. The next day, we catch Rise back at the guild, cleaning up. The guild master comes over, thanking her for handling the quest. He notices she's got something on her mind and asks her about it. She spills that a lot went down yesterday, and the guild master smirks, saying that's par for the course when those guys are involved. Rise remembers that after they dealt with the wyverns, Rick and the others left with one of the wyverns to cook up for dinner. So she's surprised they eat wyverns, and the guild master explains that Rick's team is the strongest on the continent, S-rank monsters themselves. He hopes she's learned her lesson and will start taking on quests that match her level. Rise though is determined to become an S-ranker herself, so she declares she'll start with the E-rank exam and heads off to train. Meanwhile, Rick and the squad have found one of the grand orbs, named Crimson Blossom. Mizette is feeling a massive surge of mana from it. Then Ash suggests they should be able to locate the other orbs by syncing this one with mana. So Mizette uses his earth mapping spell on the crystal to track down the locations of the other orbs. The map reveals their next destination, Heractopia, and Ash explains that Heractopia is renowned for its Colosseum and its passion for combat sports. We then see Angelica in action, taking down her opponent in the Colosseum of Heractopia. Then we know that 400 years ago, when the land was still a barren desert, the fourth king Alexander Heractopia built a Colosseum in the town of Nucleopercy. Tournaments were held there, and King Alexander himself participated there, and he was known for fighting with nothing but his own fists. He became a legend, racking up an unbeatable winning streak of 10,000 victories. People flocked from all over the continent to witness his prowess, and soon, the country grew large and vibrant, eventually becoming the nation of Heractopia. Fast forward to the present, we find Rick, Ash, and Rionette exploring Heractopia. They come across a statue of Alexander, famously dubbed the Fist King. Ash is impressed and wishes he could have faced the legendary king. But Rick quickly points out that such a match would likely end with Ash accidentally destroying the entire country. Rionette chimes in, explaining that Alexander didn't just build the country, he also popularized fist fighting. In fact, martial artists are so respected in Heractopia that many people have taken up the profession, proudly calling themselves fighters. Ash marvels at how awesome the country is but reminds everyone to stay focused on their mission. They try asking a passerby about the grand orbs, but the person takes one look at Ash, freaks out, and bolts. Clearly, this approach isn't working, so Rick suggests they head to the town hall to gather information, and Ash agrees. But just as they're about to go, they spot a bald guy trying to act all tough while hitting on a girl who's clearly not interested and just wants to be left alone. Ash steps in and asks the bald guy about the orbs, but the guy, feeling threatened, assumes Ash is picking a fight. He talks tough, saying he's not scared of an orc and suggests they settle it in the back alley, and happily Ash agrees. A loud thud is heard shortly after, and Ash drags the now beaten bald guy back out. Afterward, Ash, with a casual but commanding tone, tells the baldy he wants to ask him something. The baldy, thoroughly humbled, introduces himself as Gold, and the girl who had been the focus of the earlier confrontation introduces herself as Milsha. Rick shows them the grand orb they've collected, and Ash asks if they've ever seen another crystal like it. Both Gold and Milsha take a closer look, thinking it seems familiar. Milsha mentions she's seen it multiple times but can't quite remember where. Ash, with a hint of urgency, asks her to try and recall since the orb is special to them. So Milsha blushes at this, clearly smitten by Ash. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted by the announcement parade for the Fist King tournament, and they learn the tournament is just 2 months away. Gold and Milsha are visibly excited, so Rionette curiously asks what the Fist King tournament is all about. Gold explains that it's a prestigious tournament to crown the champion among fighters, and Milsha adds that it draws a crowd of about 500,000 spectators every year. They inform the group that the man leading the parade is Kelvin Orwolf, the current champion, who has won the tournament 5 times and is riding a 3-year winning streak. As Kelvin strikes a pose in front of the town during the parade, Gold idolizes him, dreaming of being just like him one day. Even Ash can sense Kelvin's strength and capability. Milsha suddenly gasps, catching everyone's attention. Rick asks what's wrong, and she points out something on Kelvin's championship belt. The very orb they're searching for is embedded in it, and Rick is stunned at this discovery. After the parade, Kelvin enters the gym, where he meets his master. The master apologizes for making Kelvin participate in the tedious parade every year, but Kelvin brushes it off, saying it's part of a fighter's duty to ensure everyone enjoys the tournament. His master then inquires about his condition, and Kelvin says that he is fine, but his master senses that he is not in his usual shape. So Kelvin mentions he'd feel a lot better if there were a strong opponent waiting for him this time. Just then, Rick and his friends walk into the gym, and Kelvin is caught off guard when he sees them. They wonder if they can talk to Kelvin, but the master, thinking they're just some overzealous fans, tries to kick them out. Rick, trying to smooth things over, explains that they're not fans, they're adventurers on the hunt for a specific jewel. But Ash, tired of Rick's tiptoeing, straight up tells Kelvin to hand over his belt. The master, now suspicious, thinks they're here to steal it. Rick scrambles to explain, but Ash cuts him off, bluntly stating that it's the jewel on the belt they're after. He explains it belonged to a member of their crew, and they've been tracking it down for years. Ash even offers to swap it out for something even more valuable, but the master isn't having it, calling their offer nonsense and telling everyone to kick them out. Kelvin, staying calm, tells everyone to chill. He says that his knows it's special, and it's telling him that they're being straight with him, but that doesn't mean he's handing over the belt. He explains that the belt is a big deal in Heractopia, and even though they just want the jewel, it's not something he can just give away. If they want it, they'll have to earn it by winning the Fist King tournament. Ash gets it and starts to leave, but Rick is still worried, asking how they're going to snag the orb now. Ash, with a smirk, says the answer is obvious, they're joining the tournament. After they leave, the master grumbles about their lack of manners, saying they need a good lesson while they're still young. But Kelvin, dead serious, tells him that if they'd pushed things, everyone in that room would be dead right now. So the master is shocked and realizes they were dealing with something else entirely. Kelvin goes on to say that the dull-looking guy's body was trained to a ridiculous level, but he didn't have that typical strong person vibe, making him hard to read. And the maid? Just from her presence, he knew she was packing some serious power. And as for the orc, Kelvin just calls him a freaking monster. Afterward, Ash lays out the plan to Rick and Rionette. They're going to become fighters, crush the tournament, and snatch that belt. But first they need to qualify. He explains that to enter the tournament, they have to pass the qualifiers held in the east and west parts of the country. Then they'll have to win a league made up of the people who also pass the qualifiers, and only then can they enter the main event. Ash decides he'll take on the east qualifiers, leaving Rick to handle the west. Rick agrees but can't help but wonder if Ash will be okay on his own. Ash reassures him, saying he's already arranged for a guide. Right on cue, Gold shows up with a flashy carriage, ready to escort Ash, and with that, the two bald buddies roll out together. The scene then shifts to Rick on his way to take the fighter test. Rionette fills him in, saying that people from all over the continent come to compete in this tournament, and Rick can't help but think it's going to be interesting. Rick enters the testing arena, and the examiner explains that the test will be a mock battle against a newcomer fighter. Rick asks if his opponent is strong, and the examiner tells him that she seems to be, having won every qualifying match so far. But there's no need to stress, wins and losses don't count here, they're just there to judge his ability. Just then, Rick's opponent steps into the arena, bragging that she's earned the nickname Lightspeed in this town. Rick immediately recognizes her voice and realizes it's Angelica. She's horrified to see that Rick is her opponent. Meanwhile, an old man in the stands is cheering for Angelica, like he's one of her fans. A guy named Nicholas joins him, surprised to see his friend watching the mock battles. The old perv admits he couldn't pass up the chance to see Angelica in action, going on about how beautiful she is, despite her flat chest. He's convinced that her opponent doesn't stand a chance, but Nicholas wisely warns him not to underestimate the novices. There's always the chance for a dark horse to surprise everyone. Then we see Angelica, still in shock, asks Rick what he's doing here, and he fires the question right back at her. He wonders if her brothers are also around, but is relieved to find out they're not. But Angelica, on the other hand, is mortified that she has to face the old man who took down her brother Raster, a top-ranked class fighter, so she's determined not to lose, even if the outcome doesn't technically count. The mock battle begins, and Angelica can't shake the thought that Rick doesn't look tough from any angle. She decides not to be careless like last time and goes all out from the start, attempting to use her blink step. But out of nowhere, she trips and falls. Confused, she tries again, only to fall once more. That's when it hits her this isn't just clumsiness. Rick calmly explains that this is a new move he mastered a few months after the E-rank exam. He calls it one of his 8 holding back moves, the starting foot sweep. He adds that it's designed to make his opponent lose the will to fight by sweeping their feet endlessly. And the best part? It barely hurts at all. Angelica can't believe he's treating her like a child and is shocked that even a second-class knight like her couldn't see his foot sweeps coming. She tries to keep her distance and fight back, but it's no use. Rick sweeps her feet again and again. Angelica, refusing to give up, keeps getting back up, only to be swept off her feet every single time. Rick is impressed by her determination and decides it's time to get serious. But just as he says that, Angelica gets terrified and quickly surrenders. Rick wins the match and officially passes the test to become a fighter. As he's leaving, Angelica catches up to him with tears in her eyes. She demands to know why he's here, And before he can answer, she starts crying, wondering aloud how many times he's going to humiliate her. Rick, panicking at the scene she's causing, tries to calm her down, and in a desperate attempt to stop the misunderstanding, offers to treat her to dinner. The scene shifts to a cozy tavern where Milsha serves up some food, casually mentioning she'll give them a little extra since her parents own the place. Rick thanks her for helping them find an inn, and Milsha is curious and asks about Ash. And when she hears he's off competing in the East League, she looks a bit bummed out. Angelica is still puzzled and asks Rick again why he decided to become a fighter. He casually drops that he's aiming to win the Fist King tournament, which leaves her completely shocked. She can't believe he's talking about something so serious, like it's no big deal. As Rick and Rionette dig into their meals, they both rave about how amazing the food is. Rionette then turns to Angelica and asks when she decided to become a fighter. Angelica explains that she made the switch 4 months ago, right after the E-rank test. Rionette is surprised since Angelica is a knight with a sword and all, but Angelica hints that she's got her own reasons for joining the tournament. Rick encourages her to keep pushing herself, but Angelica suddenly gets skeptical and asks if Rick really plans to compete in this year's tournament. When he confirms, she quickly tells him it's impossible even for him. She breaks it down, explaining that the road to the Fist King tournament is tough, with fighters needing to win 40 matches in the league within just 6 months. Rick still not seeing the issue, so Angelica explains that the league fights are brutal, and most fighters can barely manage 10 fights in a month. Rick's confidence takes a hit as he realizes the challenge ahead, especially since he's already signed up for 40 matches in just 4 days. Angelica is absolutely floored by this, thinking he's totally lost it. The scene then shifts to Rick at the reception, where he's trying to get the lowdown on his qualifying match. The receptionist directs him to Building B, and when Rick asks about his opponent, the receptionist lets him know his opponent is a guy named Grit Albert, and there is some chatter about Grit using illegal weapons, but they couldn't find anything during the body check, so it's just rumors at this point. Cut to the arena, and Rick is facing off against Grit. He scans his opponent but doesn't spot any weapons. Grit, on the other hand, gets a little too eager at the thought of taking down a newbie because he sizes up Rick and assumes he's just a rookie who decided to jump into the fighter game late in life, so maybe there's some personal reason driving him. Then Grit pulls out his dirty little secret, an impact stone hidden in the sole of his shoe. He proudly explains that this baby can multiply his punching power by 12 times. So as the match kicks off, Grit tosses his jacket at Rick to blind him and then goes in for a full force punch, using the impact stone. He's feeling pretty confident until he realizes his hand is the one that's broken. Rick quickly figures out what happened. He tells Grit that using an impact stone without properly training your body is a quick way to break your own bones. Grit is confused, insisting that he shattered a boulder with the stone earlier, but Rick just shrugs it off and says it's his turn now. Grit starts to panic as Rick steps up his game. Rick decides to use his second hold-back technique, a swing and miss punch. He explains that this move can knock someone out cold just by creating a shockwave that shakes their brain, without causing any real harm. Sure enough, Grit is knocked out, leaving the crowd and a certain onlooker named Nicholas stunned. Nicholas can't believe what he's seeing and realizes someone incredible has just entered the scene. Then the referee declares Rick the winner. Meanwhile, over in the shady pleasure district, a man approaches a bizarre creature named Jeeth, who looks like did have a very wild night, and tells him that it's time for him to get to work. The next match is between Angelica and a karate boy. The match begins with a karate kid leaping up, aiming to land an axe kick on Angelica, but Angelica is way too fast for him. She uses her blink step to effortlessly dodge the attack, then delivers a swift back kick that sends her opponent crashing into a wall, sealing her victory in seconds. Outside the arena, Rick congratulates her on her win, noting that she's now defeated all 40 opponents, qualifying her for the main tournament. Angelica, still catching her breath, asks if Rick seriously plans on fighting 40 opponents in just 4 days, because that's practically impossible. Rick, with his usual laid-back attitude, asks what's so impossible about it. Angelica realizes, with a sigh, that he hasn't done any research about this country. She explains that you can only have 1 match in an arena per day, meaning to fight 10 matches, he'd have to travel to 10 different arenas, each hundreds of kilometers apart. Rick, still unfazed, mentions that his next arena is only 30 kilometers away, but the kicker, his next match is in just 10 minutes. Angelica is utterly floored, telling him there's no way he can reach it in time, not even with a carriage. Rick gives her a look that could melt steel with its intensity and yells, "Why the hell would I use a carriage when I'm in a rush?" Without another word, he takes off at an incredible speed. leaving even Angelica, known for her lightning-fast reflexes, completely stunned. Rionette, standing by, casually asks if Angelica wants to watch the matches. Angelica, still a bit dazed, nods, mumbling that it seems impossible. But before she can even process what's happening, Rionette grabs her and starts leaping across rooftops, racing toward the next arena. By the time Angelica arrives, the match is already over. Rick has easily defeated his opponent while Angelica, still trembling from the wild ride, collapses onto the floor. But Rick doesn't have time for chit-chat, he's off to the next arena in a flash, with Rionette scooping up Angelica once again. Rick's next opponent barely stands a chance as he's taken down by a simple shockwave. Then it's on to the following arena, where Rick literally runs circles around his opponent until the poor guy knocks himself out. 4 days fly by, and Angelica is left utterly shocked. Rick actually pulled it off 40 matches in just 4 days. She's just relieved he's not in the same block as her, because facing him would mean instant defeat. But Rionette, ever the realist, points out that Rick isn't even the strongest fighter in the tournament. There's also the Orc, an S-ranked adventurer who trained Rick to reach this insane level. Angelica, coming to terms with the fact that she's up against literal monsters, asks where Rick has gone today. Rionette casually mentions that Rick's off on a quick 600-kilometer jog to a nearby city. Angelica, now so used to Rick's absurd feats, barely bats an eye as she sips her tea. Later that evening, Rick finally returns from his jog, only to be stopped by a slithery lizard man named Snape. Snape introduces himself as the chairman of the West League Committee and congratulates Rick on setting a new record for defeating so many opponents in just 4 days. As they shake hands, Rick immediately senses that Snape is no ordinary man, he's a warrior. Snape admits he used to fight years ago and even won a small tournament when he was 23, but retired soon after. Now, he's a merchant and an old friend of Angelica's family. With a sly grin, he tells Rick to take care of himself and to pass along his regards to Angelica before slipping into his carriage and riding off. Rick walks into Milsha's restaurant, looking a bit puzzled. Sensing something's off, Milsha immediately asks if everything is alright. She warns Rick to be extra cautious around Snape. Despite his gentlemanly appearance, she's heard rumors that Snape has ties to the underworld and some shady connections with gangsters. This leaves Rick wondering why on earth Snape would come here just to meet him. As he's deep in thought, Rick overhears some guys chatting excitedly about a new dark elf bunny girl who's apparently stealing everyone's hearts. Rick quickly puts 2 and 2 together and realizes it must be his dear Rionette. He rushes to the stadium, and sure enough, there she is, Rionette, along with Angelica, both dressed in bunny girl costumes, encouraging kids to gamble like it's a Jake Paul stunt. One of the rowdy customers starts getting loud and obnoxious, taking a jab at Angelica, but she's in no mood for games. She promptly beats the crap out of him, literally stepping on his head and daring anyone else to give it a try. Just then Rick arrives, shocked to see Angelica dressed like that and promoting betting and gambling. But his jaw practically hits the floor when he catches sight of Rionette, looking absolutely stunning in her outfit, like the hottest carrot shake ever. Meanwhile, back at the gym, Discount Nick Fury is reading a newspaper about an orc who won 40 matches in just 2 days, using no more than a single punch each time. He's baffled, wondering what kind of beast they're dealing with. Kelvin then updates him on Rick, who also won 40 bouts in 4 days, an incredible feat in its own right. This news fires up Kelvin, which triggers a memory for Nick Fury. He recalls the day he found Kelvin in a rough town where he ruled the streets with gang wars. Kelvin was beating the living daylights out of an entire gang, and that's when Nick offered him a shot at a better life, bringing him back to this country to fight in the Heractopia arena and earn an honest living instead. The next morning, Rionette, Angelica, and Rick sit down for breakfast when Rick casually mentions that Snape guy who claimed to know her. Angelica's face tightens at the mention of that name, and she quickly denies knowing anyone by that name, clearly stressed. Later that day, the first main match kicks off with Angelica squaring off against a tough, muscular girl. Rionette notices that Angelica looks unusually tense, which is out of character for her. As the match begins, Angelica charges at her opponent, who manages to block the first kick and counter. But Angelica, being the speed demon she is, quickly recovers and lands another powerful kick that sends her opponent crashing into the wall, securing her victory. Next up, Rick faces off against some random fool who thinks wind magic will be his ticket to victory. Rick easily dodges the attacks, slips past him, and delivers a karate chop that barely touches the guy, but it's enough to knock him out cold, dropping him right into Rick's arms like a sack of potatoes. The next few matches fly by as both Angelica and Rick slice through their opponents like butter. By evening, Angelica is utterly drained from all the fights. Rick tries to warn her about her final opponent of the day, but she cuts him off, determined to finish what she started. Her final opponent, a massive, grotesque hulk of a man whose face could scare a ghost. But Angelica, ever the fighter, doesn't flinch. She immediately goes all out, using her blink step to close the distance and leaping into the air to create a water wall around him. The wall quickly engulfs the fatty, and Angelica unleashes an electric blast, trying to fry him on the spot. But to her frustration, the guy's skin is ridiculously thick, and he somehow survives the onslaught. Angelica, not one to give up, charges in for another attack. But the fatty, surprisingly nimble for his size, dodges her strikes and lands a colossal punch that sends Angelica flying into the wall, ending the fight with a brutal knockout. Later that night, after getting patched up by the nurse, who sternly advises her to take it easy, Angelica steps out of the infirmary only to be immediately confronted by Rick. "Why the hell did you fight like an idiot against someone with solid defense?" he snaps, clearly frustrated. Angelica, still acting off, brushes him off, telling him to mind his own business as she tries to walk away. But Rick isn't one to back down so easily, and he keeps after her, finally wearing down her defenses. She eventually caves and reveals the truth: Snape is her fiancé. After her parents died, her grandfather made a deal with Snape, selling Angelica to him for a massive sum of money, all against her will. Now that the engagement is official, their noble family can't just break it off without bringing shame to their name. That's why she's been digging into Snape's shady business dealings. She tells Rick that Snape is a major sponsor of the tournament and has planted one of his own fighters in the competition. But Rick doesn't quite see why this matters until they hear a commotion coming from a nearby tavern. Peeking inside, they spot a red lizard man choking a waitress. The same fatty who had beaten Angelica earlier tries to step in, but the lizard man effortlessly grabs him and slams him to the ground, knocking him out with a single hit. Angelica is shocked, but still musters the courage to intervene. As the lizard man moves toward her, ready to throw a punch, Rick steps in and casually catches his arm, telling him to back off. Just then, Snape strolls into the tavern, ordering the lizard man to stand down and save his strength for the tournament. He introduces the lizard as his younger brother Jeeth, who apparently has anger issues but calms down quickly. Snape promises to compensate the tavern owner for the damage and leads Jeeth out of the establishment. Angelica then confides in Rick, explaining her suspicions that Snape is involved in match fixing and is trying to rake in a fortune through his chosen fighter. She admits that she entered the tournament to defeat Snape's fighter and expose his corruption, but now that goal seems increasingly out of reach. To her surprise, Rick looks at her with determination and offers to train her for the upcoming matches, and that makes her wonder if that means that she will die. The next day, Rick warns Angelica that the upcoming training will be tougher than anything she can imagine. But Angelica, full of bravado, tells him not to hold back. But her confidence takes a hit when Rick casually straps some heavyweights onto her. And without missing a beat, Rick advises her to remember her strengthening magic unless she wants to end up dead. Angelica can't help but wish he'd at least explain what the hell they're doing first. But Rick got no time for explanations, and he just drags her along as he takes off running. Angelica panics, completely clueless about what's happening, and finally, Rick decides to clue her in. He explains that this is all about getting her body used to fast movement by being yanked along by someone faster. Sure, Angelica's got great acceleration, but she loses all stability right after. Angelica then desperately begs him to stop, just for a moment, but Rick declares that the secret to rapid improvement is pushing yourself beyond your limits. And he adds with a smile that she doesn't have to worry because there are only 6 more hours left. When it's finally over, Angelica can't believe her legs are still attached. She was convinced they'd fallen off somewhere along the way. Rick, however, just grins and tells her he went through this exact same torture and even died 3 times on his first day. Angelica feels a sliver of pride for surviving, but that quickly fades when Rick casually mentions that they still have afternoon training lined up right after a short lunch break. Angelica, then on the verge of tears, begs for mercy, but Rick, conveniently hard of hearing, just cheerfully says they'll meet again in an hour. After 5 grueling days of training, Angelica convinces herself that she didn't run away. No, she just made a tactical retreat to protect her mental health. She is very confident that Rick won't find her, but she quickly realizes just how wrong she is. Rick says that he combed the entire country for her, but to her utter shock, it's only been 15 minutes since she fled. Rick surprisingly understands why she bolted, because during his 2 years of training, he did the exact damn thing. He ran away dozens of times, but he also died tens of thousands of times in the process. There was even a time when Alice had to share her mana with Ash so he could revive Rick another 2,000 times. This led to even more brutal training and countless deaths, so Rick had no choice but to toughen up. He was on the verge of giving up countless times, but Ash always managed to push him forward. Ash would tell him to compare the regret he'd feel if he gave up to his current suffering. The weight of giving up was always heavier, so Rick kept pushing through. Angelica then vents about everything she hates about being a noble. It's because of all those burdens that she decided to contribute to her family as a fighter, not just as a noble lady. So this is why she dreams of becoming the first special class woman knight. Angelica doesn't want to feel the crushing weight of regret either, so she's ready to dive back into training. Rick then mentions that Angelica is naturally suited to using a sword, but the tournament doesn't allow weapons. So because of this, Rick decides it's best to teach her techniques that turn her hands into deadly weapons. And to do this, Rick brings in Ryanette to join their training. Fast forward a bit, and it's time for the final match between the top contenders of Block C. This is Angelica's fight, but she's growling like a wild beast for some reason. So Nicholas comments that Angelica's usual elegant fighting style won't work against this particular opponent. But there's something different about her today. The fight begins, and everyone is stunned as she attacks with brute force, instantly claiming victory. Rick is pleased with the results of the training, but Angelica seems to be in some sort of extreme fighting addiction that has gotten out of control. Later we see Mizette returns after chasing down a lead on one of the other orbs, only to come back empty-handed. Frustrated, Mizette then tries to flirt with the waitress, but gets shut down faster than he can say smooth talker. That night, Ash tells Mizette that they'll get their hands on another orb if they win the tournament. Alice wants to join in on the action too, but Rick quickly shuts that down, worried she'd accidentally demolish the whole arena. Rick also mentions that he's been training Angelica, but she's bummed out, thinking there's not enough time to get stronger. The whole crew rallies around her, reminding her that even a bit of training can make a huge difference. Alice is clueless as ever about what they're talking about, but still cheers everyone on to do their best. And after the words of support from everyone, Angelica's ready to give it everything she's got. The next day, the Fist King tournament kicks off. The first matches are announced, and we get a glimpse of who Rick, Angelica, and Geese are up against. Seeing this, Rick breathes a sigh of relief that he doesn't have to go up against Ash because he knows he'd just throw in the towel if that happened. Ash's opponent is some fishy-looking guy, and his bald friend is in the stands, cheering him on. Kelvin also makes an appearance, but someone in the audience seems concerned about his condition. Nick Fury, however, remains unfazed, confident that Kelvin will come out on top no matter what shape he's in. As the crowd starts placing bets, Angelica spots something fishy. Jeeth has been conveniently placed in a spot where he won't have to face Ash or Kelvin until the final round. The match fixing is already in full swing, setting up Jeeth to look unbeatable. Angelica sees right through their plan. They'll make Jeeth seem like a powerhouse, and when the odds against him are sky high, Snape will place a massive bet on his opponent. Jeeth will then take a dive, letting Snape cash in big time, but Angelica's not having it. She's set to face Jeeth in the second round, and she's determined to throw a wrench in their dirty scheme. A little later, Kelvin mentions how happy he is to see Ash and Rick at the tournament. Ash quickly reminds him that they're all gunning for the belt, and they each look forward to facing off against one another. Nick chimes in, noting that Kelvin's got the look of a true challenger again, and it takes him back to how Kelvin looked years ago. He's talking about the time when he first brought Kelvin to his gym. Nick was boasting about having a fighter from his gym reach the top 4 in the tournament, and Kelvin was allowed to fight this guy. Kelvin, in his typical overconfident fashion, wondered if he was even allowed to end the guy's life. But of course that's against the rules, just like using a weapon. But those were pretty much the only rules. Kelvin, cocky as ever, told the guy not to be upset after losing, but instead, Kelvin found himself flat on the ground. Kelvin lost that fight, but his ridiculous potential was crystal clear, even though he'd never had formal training before. After his first defeat, Kelvin underwent a transformation, training like a madman to grasp victory. He started looking forward to losing against stronger opponents because it just fueled his drive to train even harder. This relentless pursuit was the life Kelvin had always craved, and his tireless training led to him shocking the world. He ended up decimating the reigning champion in his very first tournament. And it's been 6 years since then, but Nick is thrilled to see that fire in Kelvin's eyes once more. The first match of the tournament kicks off, and Jeeth's opponent quickly finds himself fighting like a rabbit. Despite trying to provoke Jeeth into taking the fight seriously, the guy doesn't stand a chance. Jeeth, with a single swing, shocks the entire arena with the sheer power he can generate. Even though the opponent refuses to back down and unleashes a barrage of attacks at lightning speed, it only serves to irritate Jeeth, and without much effort Jeeth delivers another blow, unintentionally knocking the guy out cold. He's declared the winner, leaving everyone wondering if there's ever been a sponsor fighter this powerful. Sure, Jeeth's strength is undeniable, but Rick senses something off. Despite Jeeth's overwhelming power and toughness, his movements are those of a complete amateur. Still, Jeeth wins easily and leaves a lasting impression on the crowd. As the tournament progresses, our heroes dominate their fights, each one moving forward. Finally, it's time for the last match of the first round, and all eyes are on Kelvin. The excitement is palpable as everyone is eager to see what he's got. Kelvin wastes no time, attacking with blistering speed. Rick can't help but notice that it's as if Kelvin knows exactly what his opponent is going to do before they even move. Ash chimes in, explaining just how insane Kelvin really is able to sense shifts in electrical signals and adrenaline just by smell. They all agree that Kelvin is an incredible fighter, but the crowd is stunned when Kelvin suddenly hits the ground. Rick's shock turns to realization as the others explain that Kelvin actually let himself get hit. The crowd roars for Kelvin, and with a smirk, he gets up and quickly knocks out his opponent. Kelvin is announced the winner, but his friends can't help but think he's just toying with everyone. The second round kicks off the next day, and Snape arrives, sliding into a seat right next to Rick. He introduces himself to the group, but Alice immediately suspects something's off, wondering why the lizard is putting on a nice guy act, but the lizard just smiles. Rick then puzzled asks why Snape isn't in the VIP seats, so Snape explains that this next fight is crucial. It's between his brother and his fiancée, and he needs to see every detail up close. In the halls, Jeeth is nursing a hangover from the night before when he bumps into Angelica. Jeeth barely remembers who she is, and casually mentions that Snape told him not to mess up her face so she'd still look good at their wedding. So Angelica tells him that she will show him the results of her hard training, but Jeeth mockingly dismisses her efforts, claiming that no amount of training could ever bridge the gap between their power levels. Angelica thinks he must have trained just as hard given his physique, but she is shocked when Jeeth reveals that he doesn't train at all. He just lives his life, and his body naturally ends up this way. Jeeth smugly declares himself a natural-born talent and suggests that Angelica stand still during their fight, so he doesn't accidentally hit her stomach because he wouldn't want to mess up her ability to bear Snape's children after all. Angelica's blood boils, and she vows to utterly destroy him. The match kicks off with the crowd going wild. But Angelica is quickly taken aback when her first strike doesn't even faze Jeeth. She dodges his counterattack, but once again, her blows seem useless, even when they land squarely on him. Realizing her basic attacks are no match for Jeeth, Angelica pulls a move that catches everyone off guard, including Snape, who's watching intently from the stands. She deactivates her strengthening magic, leaving Jeeth puzzled about what she's planning. Rionette cheers her on from the sidelines as Angelica taps into her mana reflex inversion. Jeeth, still cocky, tells her to give up, but Angelica unleashes her new thread slicer attack, finally breaking through Jeeth's defenses and landing a cut. The crowd erupts in cheers, and Angelica smirks, wondering aloud who Jeeth was calling a small fry now. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.